Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain. And today, on Cool Your Heels with Lillian, our special guest is Dr. Mandy Simon, who created a video free video series, which is called Finding Your Holy Grail. So, good morning, Mandy. How are you doing this wonderful day?
Good morning, Lillian. I'm very well. I'm happy to see summer finally coming about.
Even with the heat?
Well, where I am in Massachusetts, it's been maybe 65, 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's usually much hotter. So, yeah.
Well, I'm letting you know, I'm in Pennsylvania, and it's supposed to go up to 84, 85. And it's already about somewhere in the 80s, I would guess, and very humid. So it's a lot preheater than if it was just a dry heat.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is what you have to look forward to. Lucky you.
I know.
So could you give us a brief introduction of who you are and why you decided now was the time to create a video series talking about finding your Holy Grail?
Sure. So I actually have worked in healthcare for about 25 years. I work in different capacities as a clinical researcher, as a nurse practitioner, and then I've also worked as a professor in health informatics. And your Holy Grail to me is about finding one's inner truth, and it's defined by each and every individual person. And during the pandemic, one of the things that I noticed that was most prevalent was this aspect of us perhaps not being able to deal with, as people, this repetitive stress. And in the healthcare field, we're built for short-term stress, but we're not built for repetitive stress. And the repetitive stress that we have in our societies is something that has a rule set with it that we're often better equipped to deal with. So I wanted to focus on building resilience in people and having them understand that they didn't need to live in fear during this time. Since about April 5th, I've been working most days of the week on the COVID unit at the hospital, and I just felt that this was very important, that we don't get stuck in the story of when the pandemic hit, and we find a way as people to move beyond.
What do you say to people? I mean, I've heard it a couple of times, mostly from millennials, and if you're a millennial, my apologies, but mostly from the millennials. I never thought I would live to see a pandemic, and I'm thinking to myself, really? I was born during the 50s, sir, and when they brought out the vaccination for polio, they put it into sugar cubes and experimented on all the kids in the United States. And we never thought of it that we were human guinea pigs. And I put that right up there with the pandemic that's going on, because polio was a big deal in the 30s and the 40s.
Yeah, I think that this is the perfect example. And I actually did watch a documentary most recently on polio, and I thought this very thing. The truth is that I'm not a millennial, and I actually lived with my grandmother during high school and remember all the conversations she would say to me, well, when I was a child, we didn't have this or we didn't have that, and so on and so forth. And I realized how much technology has entered our lives in such a way that people have not had, this is part of the reason I created this series, is that people have not had to depend on what does it mean to not have this instant gratification of being able to fix a problem, and to really have to dig deep within to find these tools that make us resilient as people. And this is what I wanted to focus on.
So do you find that kids in high school or maybe junior high, I know I have 3 grandchildren, so I have one who just turned 7 today, and he's aware that society is sick, but he's not aware of the consequences. And then I have 2 teenage girls who are turning 14, and they're so involved with their life that I'm not going to say they pay token, but they don't seem to be afraid. And I really think it's the tone that the parents have set within the house. although I know other parents have exhibited fear, and so their kids are biting their nails or maybe more prone to eating disorders, or they're gluing themselves to the TV or to the game on the computer. Have you found that to be true?
I think that this is a really important point. I have had a lot of speakers on the series. One of them is a child psychologist, and she deals with gaming addiction and technology conversations between parents, for example. And a lot of this comes down to how well is the person within themselves dealing with this crisis so that they can control their own responses to this type of stress and then lead by example. And this becomes something where in the healthcare field, one of the things that I noticed is that, you know, the staff is not built for this day in and day out stress of wearing personal protective equipment and having to not have this human connection with people. We don't have visitors in the hospital anymore. So all of these things affect us. And I think what you're alluding to is a really important point, which is what is the post-traumatic stress from a pandemic? So there are some people that say, I never thought I'd live through a pandemic. But the more important question is, how do we look inside ourselves to recognize the pieces that keep us centered and help us move forward to not get stuck in this story?
And I think another important question is, you need to really recognize that the normal we had for over a couple of centuries no longer is going to exist, because I believe that the C virus is just the tip of the iceberg, because you're going to have many more types of viruses like this coming in wherever they originate from. And they're not going to come once. I mean, take a look at the bubonic plague. People laugh. But take a look at the bubonic plague. It struck Eurasia for a couple of hundred years before it really finally burned out. And it's the problem is still there. Look at all the diseases that come out of Africa, for example, that we haven't learned how to contain. Isn't that the same type of where people really need to understand how to handle something like this before allowing their fear to take over?
I agree. And I think one of the things that society has done really well with, and I'm being sarcastic a bit, is the fact that, you know, everything in the first world countries was so easy to obtain, and much of the time that we spend in our communities is taken away with things like activities of consumerism rather than activities within a community to build the community in such a way that the community can be resilient. The smaller, closer-knit communities feel this. But one thing that we understand in clinical research, and I work in cardiology, for example, is that at the time that the American family started to live no longer as the parents, the grandparents, the children under the roof, and they moved out into the father and the mother with just the kids, this predominant aspect of stress took over in the societies, and we see cardiac disease as a disease of stress, but we also know that based on lifestyle changes of exercise, stress reduction, diet, things like this, that we can actually reverse that kind of disease. And so it's very interesting to me at this time to understand that we've been divided out of society. We've been physically distanced out of society to spend time alone. And I don't think that, you know, anything, if you study the human body and you understand the physiology of it, it's this incredibly complex and amazing thing that the earth is the same way. It has all these checks and balances. And so you have to question the connection between human health and planetary health and what it is that humans were doing to the planet and how this is affecting us. And because we haven't looked at this and we haven't looked at our relationships and these types of things, we have to learn how to evaluate, is this part of the problem?
And that's going to be very difficult because most people, what I call the lemmings in the world, who will follow their leader off a cliff and into the ocean, don't really think about those kind of things. They've been preconditioned to get a job, get married, have their kids, and whatever on this planet is theirs for the taking. But if you stop and think about why America was discovered in the first place, that's exactly the old style thinking that forced the Europeans and the Asians over to the North American shores, because they pretty much ravished the earth in their part of the world.
History is very important here, and it's very important in terms of giving us the markers and the coordinates to understand what not to do. And, you know, this aspect of the virus being a part of society now, we don't know how it's going to affect travel to other countries. Tourism is completely changed this year. We're going into the summertime, and people are not traveling. And what is this going to mean? And you know, there are so many aspects of the cause and effect, but, you know, the supply chain of our food, with even the antibiotics that we use in animals that go into what it is that we eat as people. I grew up on a rural farm in northern Colorado where we grew our own food and you know, our own animals. And when I moved to high school and stayed with my grandmother and I ate the food from the grocery stores, I almost couldn't eat it because it tasted tainted to me. And so what we don't understand is that our food source is a huge important part of this process, and the way that we have mechanized and created all of these things on the planet actually is affecting our health in a really detrimental way.
Absolutely. And I also think that our whole economic system is based on what we were in the 19th and 20th century, and was not really ready-made for the 21st century. Think about it. We're an agrarian society. Well, guess what, folks? That underground water, that reservoir, that's almost depleted. So the breadbasket of the USA's got to move somewhere. It's not going to be the West, because you'll have the Dust Bowls again. In fact, if you look at some of the emails that are coming in from all these ex-military and ex-Wall Street and ex-financiers, are all warning of a Great Depression that's going to be worse than the one we had before. But if you take a look at what our foundation for our economic wealth is based on, it's no surprise.
Yeah, I think that this is very important. And one of the really salient examples that we have at this point is this working remote. So it's now been proven that you don't need to be in an office to do your work if, you know, you're sitting in a cubicle. Like, many of these people have continued their work remotely. And so the question becomes, did you need to move into the city with your family, or move 2 hours outside of the city and commute 3 hours a day into the city to do your job and to be away from your family? It's starting to have people reevaluate. And, you know, when I looked at finding your holy grail, I focused on areas that are in love, they're in business, and they're in life. And the question is, are you the person that you've aspired to be? Are you loving the person that you really love? Are you working in the job that you truly desire to be working in? And, you know, that is not to exclude the people who have been, you know, forced into unemployment during this time. I don't want to forget this group of people, but it is to focus us on the fact that the system is not set up in such a way to be equal to all human beings on the planet.
No. I mean, if you take a look at the city, who's still in the city? Well, it's typically the poor and the lower middle class, because they don't have the economic means nor the job skills really to go out into the suburbs or into the country. When I was in my 20s, I rebelled, and I lived off the land, what they called homesteading, for 4 or 5 years. And we only ate what we grew and what we killed. And if we didn't have it, yes, ladies and gentlemen, we did without. And we did not own a car. We used bicycles. So during the winter, up in Industry, Maine, when the snow came, you didn't go out anywhere from December, January, February, March until April practically. So, and it's a rough life, but it also teaches you to look within yourself and to find what you're looking for.
It does, and I grew up very similar to what you're describing here. And I think, you know, something that is very interesting is that I've been living abroad in England for the last couple of years and traveling back and forth for work. And to be in the healthcare profession and working in a country that has socialized medicine, you know, one of the things as a healthcare provider that I constantly recognize is the inequality of healthcare services provided, and the fact of being in this country where healthcare is really a privilege and not a right. I mean, I grew up, you know, in America as an American, but I had a single mother on a working ranch, and we had land, but we didn't have money, and so we didn't qualify for any of the healthcare services that were available.
Yes, I encountered the same thing. I was single, brought up my kids 15 years, but they would not give me anything because I had an associate's degree and because I was white. Yes, I've been there.
So, you know, it's very interesting because the truth is that it doesn't matter, and this is what I really like about, you know, your show, is the aspect that it really can't be about what we were born into. It has to be about who we are as a people on the planet and how it is that we work together and we recognize that in some way, shape, or form, regardless of the color of our skin or the experiences of what we've had, that there is such an inequality that's been created in the systems that exist that we must, as communities, come together and learn how to take care of our neighbors.
And also learn how to reapply ourselves to the remaining resources on our planet, the minerals, the reserve water sources. People in South America, they have meters in their apartment, in their home, and they have to feed the meter to get water and heat. Yeah. So before you start groaning, think about this. When I was living off the land, the outhouse was almost a half a mile away, and I would run down the path of snow in my bare feet to go and use it and then come back. And during the winter, you would use one of those porcelain potty and put the fire ashes on it to keep the smell down. But you did that because that was what you did. And I learned a lot of things, and one of them was you only consume as much as you need, and whatever you don't need, you either disperse it in such a way that other people can use it, or you put it away and use it the next day. But you don't hoard.
Yeah. And you don't waste it. And so the question becomes, yeah, and so the question becomes, you know, for people that don't have access to these types of just even minimal, I mean, in human health as healthcare providers, you know, the thing that we focus on is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Do you have food? Do you have shelter? Do you have water, right? And yet in the hospitalized system, you know, the food that is served to the patient, the amount of noise that happens in a hospital, you know, all of these things seem to have been forgotten. And so we have to look, you know, the work that I've done as a professor has been about systems thinking analysis. And so this pause reset that we're in right now should be prompting us as human beings to recognize that we're the most innovative resources on the planet, and that if we can think about ways to interact effectively with the system in such a way that is nurturing to the environment that we live in, to create a more nurturing environment, to create a more nurturing situation for the people that we love, that we don't even know, that we live next door to, instead of this me capacity, and recognizing the importance of working with the planet rather than just using it however we choose to, these are the important moments that I think this pause is meant for.
And I think, too, if you're looking for our Holy Grail, please don't go look for it out in outer space. The worst thing that we can do to the solar system is repeat our behavior on the moon or on Mars or any other planet we decide we need to go and spread out to. Surely we're advanced enough that we can sit down, hopefully, and really resolve that what we did here on Terra, we're not going to repeat somewhere else.
Yeah. This is important. I think that you're making such a beautiful point. And it's a subtle point if people haven't lived it or experienced it before, but it's this idea that you use only the resources that are required and you pay for them in advance of using them so that you have a sense of what it means in terms of cost, whether it's cost to person or cost to the planet or cost to the credit of using something. These are the very important pieces.
And remember, too, that when you go to Mars, you're going to be asleep for 2 years to get there. And the second thing is, despite what you saw in the movie, The Earthling, you're not going to be able to set up all these lights and run it from the generator of the spaceship, because no captain in their right mind would waste a valuable resource like that. And you're not going to be able to grow crops on Mars as the type of crops you grow here on Earth.
Yeah.
And water is going to be a big deal.
Well, and if we think about the contamination of the water sources and the soil sources and these types of things and the level of disease that exists in the population, we have to think about the things that we've unnaturally done with the pesticides and things of this nature that really make us less resilient as people, because our human bodies understand how to use the natural components of the world, but they don't know how to utilize the synthetic components of the world. And so a lot of the things that we've done as we've moved into convenience in the world has really put us in a situation where we're not necessarily understanding the connection to that. And so when we talk about looking from within, it is about understanding how we've affected the system and how the system has come to meet the needs of the demands that we put on it, rather than understanding how we can work symbiotically.
And this, in turn, then leads to the basic question: how do you deal with the people who become depressed or become less satisfied with who they are, so they try to take their own lives, or they start taking drugs to ease this emotional pain?
Yeah. I mean, all of these situations are very real, and the truth is that the stress of everyday life that coats over us and becomes part of our identity is this piece that, if we had more of an opportunity within our societies to learn how to unload these pieces each day and not allow them to weigh us down, and we understood how, or it was accepted how to deal with our feelings in a productive manner, then a lot of these things we understand could be lesser diseases and problems and lead to a healthier society. And one of the things that leads to this is poor shelter, poor food, poor water sources, poor access to care. And so all of these things affect what people end up dealing with. And I think that this is a really important aspect for us to understand during this pandemic, is that it isn't just about a virus. It's about this aspect of just the layering of things that have been unhealthy for us as people, that make us as people unhealthy, and how we can look at undoing these pieces.
And I think, too, the pandemic has showed us in a lot of ways that people are very fragile. And while they build up walls to protect themselves, or they build up some kind of defense system, when that defense system is inadequate to handle the load that's coming in, people have a tendency to implode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, it is very important to explain to people that this is not necessarily something that is directly their fault. This is something where they're trying to learn how to make it in a society in which they were born into, and really trying to understand what the intricacies are based on the various aspects that we've talked about today can help us understand how to be part of the solution rather than to be so burdened with the problems. But it really is going to take collaboration. And I used to work for Outward Bound when I was in my 20s, and I would take students on 30-day courses into the backcountry of Colorado. And the thing that we used to say in Outward Bound all the time is we would have 2 instructors and 10 students, and we would have we'd have to do everything by map and compass and so on and so forth, and we would be carrying on our backs for 30 days everything that we required to be safe and to be secure out in nature. And the idea was that you could only walk that day up the mountain, and you moved only as quickly as what we called the weakest link. And the weakest link each day was a different person based on physically how they were, mentally and spiritually how they were, emotionally how they were. And it really allowed you to understand that all of the progress made in that environment to ensure your safety and well-being was a group of people that depended on one another. And this is what societies are meant to be. But because of the various conveniences and technologies and things, and just the way that the economic systems are set up, it leaves this out as the feature of daily society.
It reminds me of a lot of the book Brave New World, where they had 2 societies, one that lived up in the clouds, and the other one who lived down on the reservations. And God forbid you sank to that level for whatever the reason. And the thing of the matter was, there was not ever where the 2 civilizations would ever join. Yeah. Because the people who were in charge of living luxuriously up in the clouds made sure of that. And yet, when you take a look at some of the movies that are coming out, what is it, Piercer, that all of civilization is contained in a train, and the wealthy and the more important people have the good stuff, all the other people behind do not, and they raise up, so not only do they destroy that which is going to preserve life, but they destroy everything. Yeah. And you kind of wonder, why isn't this behavior contained for all our civilization? If we're able to do some of the things that people are imagining that we're capable of doing, why can't they be capable of imagining a better type of life for all?
I think this is a very important question. What is your big why, right? And during this time, people have had more time than ever before in the history of our modern world to evaluate their why. And this is why I often say, are you the person that you aspire to be? Are you living with the person that you truly love? Are you in the work that you're truly meant to do? Because a lot of times we don't ask ourselves these questions. We just do.
Well, I think you accept what you're given, what you're raised for. And unless you're really the kind of person who really looks deep within. I mean, I wasn't happy with the way I was raised, so I reinvented myself several times. And
I
found every time I did it, I became a better person. Yeah. And I was certainly not the type of person my parents expected, but I was happier and healthier than I was if I had continued on the route that they had molded me to take.
Yeah. And I truly believe that everyone has this ability within inside of themselves. And I'm really hopeful that as a society, because we're globally affected by this pandemic now, it's not just an earthquake in one part of the world. It's not just a terrorist attack in one part of the world. It's not just one part of the world. It is the whole world. And there is no difference between any of us. And the sooner that we understand this and accept it and embrace it, the sooner that we'll be able to understand that all of the answers that we require are already within us.
Absolutely, unless you want to go into some of the other type of sci-fi pictures that have said, well, the ones with guns will take over. Of course, you always wonder where they're getting all the bullets because eventually they will run out. But But the thing of the matter is that you don't want chaos. But at the same time, you do want something within you that can determine what is your best path to go, whether it's the road not used by somebody else, as Robert Frost said, or the road that you're going to take because it's best for you and nobody else, and you may have to walk through some thorns before you finally achieve your objective or your holy grail. But in the long run, it's a journey worth taking.
Yeah, and I think that, as I looked at the various different speakers, the speakers come from all walks of life, and it is interesting to see, many of these people have been homeless. Many of these people started out in different careers, and these are some of the most successful people on the planet right now, but it's because they're doing what their life's work has called them to do, and it's because they've gone through this real hardship and had to reevaluate in themselves, is this the right thing for me? Because if it was the right thing for them, they wouldn't have been at a dead-end road and asked this question. And so, we as a society, as a planet, are at a dead-end road at the moment. And so it's really important to evaluate this for each of us, to be able to say, actually, I think that I could be doing X, Y, and Z either differently, better, or more intuitively, whatever it is for each individual person, but recognizing that we are the strength of everyone that we stand with, not the people that we stand against.
Exactly. So, Mandy, could you please tell everybody where they can find your video series, where they can find your website, the whole 9 yards?
Sure. So we just finished the run of the video series, but you can go to findingyourholygrail.com, and you can download and watch the videos for free just by entering your email address. There is no charge for them at all. So it's findingyourholygrail.com. You can write to me at findingyourholygrail@gmail.com. You can follow us on Mandy Simon _official on Instagram, and you can find me on LinkedIn. We also opened a YouTube station, Finding Your Holy Grail, and the videos are there as well if you don't want to subscribe to the community, but you want to be able to watch the videos. So we've tried to make the work available and free to anyone that wants to join the conversation. And it's been an amazing experience for me. I've worked basically every day on the hospital unit while doing this and conducting these interviews. And I'm sure, years from now, or at least when I have a break from the hospital, I'll look back on this and think, how was this actually done during this time? But it just felt so important to do it.
Oh, I think it is important. I don't think people really think that the Holy Grail is found within them to start out with because they're disconnected. And I think this is very important. So, ladies and gentlemen, and adults of all ages, you can hear this interview with Dr. Mandy Simon with her free video series on Finding Your Holy Grail at https://passionate world talk radio. Menu on right-hand side of the page. Scroll down until you come cool your heels. Click on it. If you don't like technology or your grandson has stolen your cell phone or Android, you can call up on the phone. There's a number provided, and the recording starts immediately. You can also hear it on Spreaker, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, to name a few, Podchaser, also on iHeart, iTunes, and Alexa, Amazon Alexa. So you should be able to hear her and see her all over the place. And before you go away and stray, Marcel Proust had this to say in 1913, "The facts of life do not penetrate to the sphere in which your beliefs are cherished. They do not engender those beliefs, and they're powerless to destroy them. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you have a great day. And remember, stay healthy. Thank you.